Hello and welcome. You're watching France 24. Coming up, special edition, at least 6 killed as Beirut's rocked by its worst gunfire in more than a decade. The Christian Lebanese Forces Party denies shooting at a rally of Hezbollah and its allies. They'd come out against a magistrate's efforts to pursue criminal charges over last year's port explosion that left over 200 dead. We'll be crossing live to the Lebanese capital in this edition. Hello everyone, I'm François Picard. It was a front line during Lebanon's civil war, the Beirut neighborhood of Tayoune, the scene of a harrowing flashback to those times. Rooftop snipers shooting as pro-Hezbollah demonstrators and their allies from Amal were rallying. At least 6 killed. The army deployed. The Lebanese Forces Party of former Christian militia leader Samir Geja denying involvement in the bloodbath that targeted a rally against a magistrate's effort to prosecute last year's Port of Beirut blast that rocked the capital, leaving over 200 dead. Mario Sofos has more.
Endless rounds of gunfire rang out in the streets of the Lebanese capital on Thursday. Here, a man struck by a bullet is seen being carried away by other residents. Elsewhere, this man in a balaclava fires a machine gun in the middle of the road. Beirut became a theatre of urban guerrilla warfare, forcing the army to be deployed to bring calm to the streets. It all began with this demonstration by militants from the Shiite Muslim movements Hezbollah and Amal. They gathered in front of the Palais de Justice, located in one of Beirut's Christian neighbourhoods, calling for the removal of Tareq Btar. He is the judge in charge of the investigation into August 2020's port explosion that left more than 200 people dead and some 6,500 injured. Hezbollah and Amal have accused Christian Party Lebanese forces of starting the clashes by positioning snipers in surrounding buildings and firing on demonstrators, a claim that has been denied by the party.
It's not clear who was shooting. What we heard was there were snipers on rooftops. They began the shooting, but then it's clear that there were also armed elements amongst the protesters. We were seeing images of gunmen on the street also responding to the snipers, and then it quickly escalated and spread to different neighborhoods.
Street clashes rarely descend into such violence in Beirut, with several people killed and others wounded on Thursday. Prime Minister Najib Mikati has called for calm to be restored.
Well, for more, we're joined by Lebanon correspondent Sally Farad. France 24's Philip Turl is with us in the studio. And from Beirut, journalist and documentary filmmaker Carol Malouf, thank you for joining us. Let me begin with you. Sally Farad, what's the latest?
So Beirut returned to its calmness after it witnessed around 4 hours of clashes earlier today in Tayoune and Ain al-Rammani. The clashes started only 15 minutes before an organized protest by Hezbollah and Amal movement began. The movement aimed to demand dismissing Judge Tareq Btar from his position as lead investigator into the Beirut blast. Gunfire was heard across Beirut. Residents had to evacuate the area. 6 people were killed and 32 were left injured. Now, the party that started these clashes remain unidentified, although Hezbollah and Amal released a statement condemning the Lebanese forces and accusing them of starting the clashes. The accusations, however, were later denied by the Lebanese forces.
We're seeing those images of the deployment of the military. Have there been any arrests?
There has been one, actually. The army spent a bit of time after the clashes. They're still on ground, actually, right now, trying to firstly keep the situation under control, but also to see if they can catch any of the snipers or others who are attempting to or contributed to today's violence. The Army's intelligence department is leading the investigation into the clashes. There is not much beyond that. The Minister of Interior has said that the protesters today had nothing to do with the clashes. However, we did see armed forces from Hezbollah and Amal on ground. Again, there's still so many question marks on today's violence. Who started it? Why it started? There's still question marks there, but there is an investigation under its way conducted by the Army's intelligence.
Sally, I'm reading a statement from Lebanon's president, Michel Aoun, saying, we will not allow today's violence to happen again under any circumstances. Yet, when that gunfire started to ring out, we quickly saw all the weapons coming out once again. It's been more than 2 decades since the end of Lebanon's civil war. What's the mood right now in Beirut?
So for many Lebanese and for many political parties as well, one of Lebanon's main problems is having armed people without not being part of the army. So we have random people just having their guns with them, and this is what we saw translated on the streets today. What happened in Lebanon signifies the collapse of the security status in the country, which anyway wasn't all too great before today. And many here are actually fearing an escalation despite the president's statement. In fact, the tension gave people flashback of some of Lebanon's worst days when citizens had to experience the civil war. We saw today pictures and videos of kids hiding under their desks in schools and in the hallways. We saw people fleeing their homes. And these scenes are not very different from the experience of the older generation who lived the civil war. So yes, the president said they're not going to allow an escalation, but is there a possibility for a civil war to erupt despite these statements? There are political experts who warn of a civil war if parties do not calm down, but there are other political experts who say, no, this is not part of the near future, at least.
Carol Malouf, again, this happening in the Beirut neighborhood of Tayoune, a front line during the civil war. And the fact that these clashes took place there, what does that tell you?
Well, of course, it brought back, flashbacks from the war, similar scenes, people fleeing, as your correspondent said, children traumatized in schools under the desks, hiding from stray bullets. But what is very significant about what happened today, that this is the third in a series of clashes that's been going on between the different groups who oppose generally Hezbollah's presence in Lebanon as an armed group. So we saw this in summer on the front lines with the Sunni in Khelde. We also saw it with the Druids in Rashaya, and now we're seeing it with the Christians in Ain al-Rumani. What is extremely significant about this is that the opposition groups don't seem to be scared or intimidated by Hezbollah's military presence. They seem like they're fighting back, and this has caused many casualties within the Hezbollah's ranks. Because today, most of the people who were killed were from Hezbollah and Amal's camp, and in the previous incidents as well. So this is slightly emboldening the opposition. And I know that it looks on the surface that it's a total breakdown in the security. But if you want to dissect it and look at it from a political perspective, first you feel that the fear that Hezbollah has been planting within these circles, and to show that they are the ultimate force, is slowly being embattled by those groups. And this is a very strong political statement saying, we are here, we are present, we are going to defend ourselves, and we're not going to be afraid of Hezbollah and its weapons. And this is sending a clear message to the leadership of both Hezbollah and Amal, the Shia duo, as they're called in Lebanon. And this is the first time in a very long time, in decades, that we've seen such emboldened moves by the Sunnis, the Druids, and the Christians over the past 3 months.
Yeah, and we've been talking, and we're coming up to the 2nd anniversary. We'll talk more about it in a moment, of the protest movement against all of the political class and all of those who took part in the civil war on the part of many Lebanese citizens, Carol. But we did see on Wednesday one of those former militia leaders, Samir Jeja, saying, rejecting what he called submission to intimidation by Hezbollah, and calling on the Lebanese to be ready for peaceful strike action, quote, if the other side tries to impose its will by force. Samir Jeja, who doesn't often these days call on his side to rally or demonstrate.
Well, absolutely. Even if this was not a political decision by the party to actually, put those snipers on top of those buildings, even though no one has been arrested. And I've heard that I was on the streets earlier talking to some people, because I live also around the same area in Beirut, and people were like, they were saying statements like, they were being shot at by ghosts. No one knew who those people were, who were those snipers. There were only speculations that they were Lebanese forces, because Ain al-Rumeni happens to be.
So hang on a second, Carol. Let me just ask you about this then. Let me just ask you.
Yes.
So on Wednesday, when Jeja makes those statements, did you have a premonition that perhaps it could go very sour? What with that rally taking place again at the intersection of these two neighborhoods where you have rival groups?
Well, Ain al-Rumeni is extremely significant because it borders the Shia, and since the revolution started on October 2019, many attempts were trying to been made. Some instigations from Hezbollah and the Shia, where they go in the Christian neighborhoods and start screaming Shia, Shia, Shia. And the Christians there, they see themselves as holding the fortress during the war. So there is a lot of old history in this area, and it brings back old memories. So these emotions are still very strong. What I'm saying is that even if Samir Jaja and the Lebanese forces did not plant those snipers, the statement that he made on Wednesday could have emboldened those peoples and having seen what has happened before with the Sunnis in Khalde and the Druids in Rashaya against Hezbollah's operatives in that area has emboldened people. And this is very significant, because now they're saying, we are not afraid anymore. We're standing the ground. And if you will try to cross the border, we will, if I may say, we will fight back. Somehow it's a political statement, even though on the surface it looks like a security issue, and I'm sure it will be dealt with on the political.
And the images are shocking. Let me just say the images are shocking. We can show one amateur video that was taken and sent to our former Beirut correspondent Cyril Payan. This amateur video, which was taken by a supporter of Amal who had attended that rally, and you see RPGs, machine guns. In this footage. Carol Malouf, you heard Sally Farhat talk about the fact that here we are, the civil war ended in 1990, and there's still all those weapons.
Well, yes, and it's what we call medium-sized weapons. So you see B7s, and you see some heavy machinery there. I want to also comment on the position that was taken by the army. Well, everybody says the army is the last bastion of peace and the protectors of the confessional system in Lebanon and the Republic. So I think what the army did today was significant. They were seen as they put their feet on the ground. The army general with the Minister of Defense and the Minister of Interior, they got together and they worked as a team to try to show at least the people, that the army is there and it's willing to protect the people. And we saw a lot of pictures of army officers and soldiers trying to carry the children from the schools and moving people around, trying to stop the Hezbollah men carrying the weapons to cross over to they were brought for reinforcements, as we heard. So.
All right, so the army intervening there. The picture freezing up a little bit there with Carol Malouf. We'll go back to her in a moment. Philip Turrell, before we go back to where we go from here. And to what those rallies were about originally, which was protesting against this magistrate prosecuting and what happened at the port of Beirut with that huge explosion in August of 2020. Let me first ask you international reactions.
Well, I think there's dismay on the part of the international community to the situation in Lebanon and what is going on there. And I think that dismay is also coupled with a lot of worry about how bad the situation could be. It is pretty obvious from what we've seen today that it's going to take a spark to set this off. And whether today's clashes were that spark still remains to be seen. but there have been some international reactions. First of all, France has reacted today. That was a pretty early reaction this afternoon from the French Foreign Ministry, which basically said two things. First one was calm. People should step back and not get involved in too many clashes because that could lead from bad to worse. And the second message coming out of the French Foreign Ministry was that the judiciary in Lebanon must be allowed to do its work and work on that probe into who was responsible for that blast in August 2020. There's been another reaction from Kuwait, which has just called for all of its citizens in Lebanon to get out of the country. Obviously, they're pretty worried about the situation spiraling out of control. And a reaction from the former Prime Minister of Lebanon, Said Hariri, who has described what has been going on today as unacceptable violence. But as I was saying, I think the international community is waiting for some movement in Lebanon towards a clearing up of the situation. And what we're seeing today is anything but that. This looks like as the probe is trying to work out who was responsible and what happened during that blast in Lebanon, in Beirut, in August of last year. Remember, 200 people got killed. That was probably the worst non-nuclear blast in history that took place there. Thousands of injured. And for the moment, no one has been brought to book. No one has been accused of any involvement. And someone somewhere down the line was responsible for what happened with this large amount of ammonium nitrate that was left in the centre of Beirut and which was responsible for this explosion. So the judge who is leading this inquiry, Tareq Btar, is trying hard to bring in members from all the political parties to ask them questions, to rein them in, to get answers about what happened, who was responsible and why this took place. And all the way to the line here, he's not getting anywhere.
All the way he's not getting anywhere, and it's happening, you might say, in a parallel universe. We had, it just happened with the coincidence of the calendar that the Undersecretary of State for the U.S., Victoria Nuland, happens to be in the Lebanese capital pledging $67 million for Lebanon's army on the day when it all kicks off.
Yeah, and I think, Francois, what we're seeing here is what we should be seeing, more to the point, is an investigation into what happened, an investigation into who's responsible for this bomb blast. This blast, not a bomb blast, but this blast in Beirut, which killed 200 people. That is the bottom line. And this seems to be being forgotten in what we've been talking about today. What we're talking about is a flare-up in the clashes between different groups in Lebanon. This is a symptom of the inquiry that's going on into this blast and the fact that visibly the political parties there have got something to hide, or they don't want to come up front and admit that something happened and maybe they were responsible. So this is it's turning into a political war when what should be happening is an investigation into this blast and also a clampdown on corruption in Lebanon. And we're unfortunately moving away from a clampdown on corruption and an investigation into the into the blast, not a bomb blast, just a blast. And what we're having here is a political situation that is visibly very, very tense today and could spiral out of control.
Sally Farad, can you please explain it for our viewers? Because we're coming up now on the second anniversary. October 17th will be 2 years since you started seeing demonstrations against all of the different factions in Lebanon, calling for more accountability, calling for a reform whereby corruption can be called out, where institutions will function, and of course what happened with the Beirut bomb blast, the port of Beirut blast, compounding that afterwards. Up to now, we'd had the sense that political rivals were sort of coming together to keep the system as it was. Is that still the case?
Well, looking back on October 17, 2019, where the uprising actually started, so many things have changed, and not in the direction that the protesters hope they would. So when the protest or when the uprising first started in 2019, the hopes were actually to change the current political system, to get rid of this mentality of politics and power and religion taking over justice and everything in the country. It was a fight against all these things. It was a fight against corruption. However, the evolvement of the situations and events over the past 2 years signified that, if anything, Lebanon is not back to what it were before 2019, but I think it went back before that even. So we're seeing worse days, basically. And clearly this can be translated or can be explained on different levels, but it also is reflected by the international communities. Basically, they want to help Lebanon, but at the same time, they won't help unless there are specific criteria that are followed. These criteria are not being followed, and there's actually an attack within the country, and groups such as Hezbollah, such as Hamas, such as the president's bloc in particular, that are trying to act against the will of the international community to help Lebanon in its current crises and to move it beyond corruption. And today's violence actually signifies that really what people were demanding in terms of standing against corruption and ending corruption to a large extent didn't lead anywhere, unfortunately. And the attacks against Tareq Btar also reinforced this.
And we're getting confirmation as we speak of 9 arrests so far, Sally. 9 arrests with the army remaining deployed. At the center of it all is one man, and you heard Philip Turrell mention his name, this magistrate, Tareq Btar. Sally, what's his next move? He's trying to investigate / prosecute the culprits of those who are guilty of or alleged to have been guilty of criminal negligence in that port of Beirut blast.
Tareq Btar, Judge Tareq Btar is indeed trying to basically fight corruption in his own ways, despite the extreme attacks and suspensions that has been directed towards him. Families of the victims see him, and the Lebanese in general, or many of them, see him as a person who holds the justice or represents or reflects the justice that the Lebanese. We were talking about October 17. The Lebanese were calling for on October 17, 2019, and in the 2019 uprising. Where he is going in this investigation, we're not sure, because again, in Lebanon, power is there is no separation of power. So we have the executive power and the legislative power, and they're both largely combined. And there are attacks against Btar just because he is trying to actually separate these powers. The Lebanese hope that he will lead somewhere in these investigations. However, really, how much he can do on ground with all these attacks is not certain. Yes.
And what is Hezbollah's reasoning for rallying against him?
So on Monday, Secretary General of Hezbollah, Hassan Nasrallah, in his speech said that, or accused Btar of being largely politicizing the investigation and of being biased. They are claiming that he carries an American agenda, and the ministers who are backed by Hezbollah are actually threatening that if Btar is not dismissed from his position as lead investigator into the Beirut port, they will all resign. Again, here we further see the lack of separation of powers. So this is the problem Hezbollah has with the Tareq Btar. However, if we really come to look at the names Tareq Btar is asking to question, we see a diversity. We see people from different backgrounds. We see the former prime minister who is Sunni, Hassan Diab, being asked for questioning. We see Youssef Finianos. We see Al-Mashnou. So we see really very diverse people from different backgrounds. So really the accusation that Hezbollah is using, saying that Btar is attacking or is trying to question only one group, do not really stand if we really look at the names of the people that Tareq Btar wants to question and the people he already questioned before.
And I guess the question the Lebanese more broadly are asking themselves, and you mentioned how much has changed since that movement began nearly 2 years ago, is whether or not gunshots, 6 killed, more injured, arrests, if this doesn't change the conversation now.
Will it change the conversation? In Lebanon, there is a discourse that is set by Hezbollah. It is the discourse that so many people believe. And then you have the pro-protesters or the people behind the October 2019 uprising and their discourse. So the Hezbollah discourse says that, no, they are fighting for justice, and this is what justice looks like. And then you have the pro-protesters who are saying Hezbollah is standing in the way of the investigation and blocking, basically, Tareq Btar's main job to lead this investigation. And here, this discourse in particular that is standing in the way of Judge Tareq Btar, it's important to mention that it is not only standing in the way of an investigation and halting an investigation, but it is also undermining the Lebanese constitution and the fundamentals of democracy in general. This is a universal thing. So if you cannot separate power, if you cannot stand aside and let the investigation take do its job, basically, then you are not allowing the democratic process to take place. And this is, again, not only against an investigation or halting an investigation, but it is signs that the democratic process in the country is not present, basically.
Yeah, we're getting Philip Turl, the UN Secretary General's spokesperson, reading a statement as we speak, calling for all parties to refrain from inflammatory rhetoric.
Yeah, I think, as I was saying before, this is a worrying time, not only for the people of Lebanon, but also for the international community, because they don't want this to spiral out of control. If you look at the economic state of Lebanon at the moment, this is the worst case scenario for a country that is basically on its knees financially and economically, and really desperately needs international help to get it off to get it back on its feet and to get the economy running. And I think that, to pick up on what Sally was just saying, most people in Lebanon are probably pretty pessimistic about the fact they're ever going to know what happened in August last year, whether they're going to ever find out the truth about this bomb blast this blast in Lebanon. It's not a bomb blast; it's a blast that was caused by these chemicals. So human rights groups have already expressed their dismay about what's going on today, and I think that this is a sign that that the attention, as you were saying, is being pulled elsewhere to pull attention off this inquiry so that no one is brought to book.
Sally Farad, one final question for you. You heard Philip there mention the dire economic situation Lebanon is in. Today's been a day when school kids have had to huddle under their desks in neighborhoods of the capital. But more broadly, what's the latest when it comes to things like rolling blackouts, banks that don't have money in them, and the such?
The economic situation in Lebanon remains stable in a negative way. So when the government was formed a few weeks ago, the dollar exchange rate decreased a bit. There was hope that the government would be able to basically give Lebanon some of its economic stability back. However, in the last 2 days, and today in particular with the clashes, the dollar exchange rate skyrocketed again. So today the 1,000 liras is equivalent to $21 again. So it also increased. The Lebanese are having problems accessing their most basic needs. We have a problem of electricity, a fuel crisis. We have gasoline that is super expensive for the Lebanese at a time when the minimum wage remains at 675,000 Lebanese pounds, which is equivalent to $23 on the official market rate. Access to, again, most basic needs, from food to bread. Bread now costs around like $5 on the official rate again. So it's really hard for any Lebanese to survive in this economic crisis, and the government seems to be doing short-term instead of long-term solutions so far. All
right, many thanks. Sally Farad, reporting there from Beirut. Many thanks. We want to thank as well journalist and filmmaker Carol Malouf. Philip Turl with us here in the studio. More on this on our website, France24.com.